So I want to take this moment to respond to a video Dan McClellan made on Gehenna about 6 months ago. But before I get into it, I want to make one thing clear that this is not a takedown. I'm not trying to prove him wrong. What I'm actually trying to do is show how assumptions can sometimes creep into even good biblical scholarship. And what I want is to offer a response from someone who actually spent a few years writing a PhD dissertation on this topic exactly. So here's the clip that I want to address.
And in Greco-Roman period Judaism, it became symbolic of an eschatological place of postmortem divine punishment. Now, the exact nature of that punishment was not really systematized at this point. But by the time of the New Testament, when they talk about ending up in Gehenna, they're talking about this postmortem eschatological place of divine punishment.
This is McClellan 3136. If you want to go watch the whole thing for context, it's just barely over 2 minutes. I'll link it down below in the description. But before we get into the Second Temple period or Greco-Roman Judaism, as Dan alluded to, we need the foundation first. Because everything downstream depends on what Jeremiah is doing with this valley. Now, Jeremiah 7 and 19 basically do the same thing. God tells the people the valley of Hinnom and Topheth is getting renamed. It won't be called that anymore. It will now be called the Valley of Slaughter. And both passages give the same reason. Jeremiah 7:33 says this: "The corpses of this people will be food for the birds of the air and for the animals of the earth, and no one will frighten them away." Likewise, Jeremiah 19:7b says almost the identical thing. It says, "I will give their dead bodies for food to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of the earth." Now, that's not a throwaway threat by Jeremiah. That's actually Deuteronomy 28:26, almost word for word, which states, "Your corpses shall be food for every bird of the air and animal of the earth, and there shall be no one to frighten them away." So Deuteronomy 28 lays out a covenantal curse, which is this: break the covenant, and your corpses will become food for scavenger animals and birds of the air. Jeremiah takes that curse and locates it physically in the Valley of Hinnom. And that's the moment the valley stops being about child sacrifice and starts being about covenant unfaithfulness. Jeremiah is not just changing the name of the valley, he's changing the memory of that valley. National judgment, not personal afterlife consequences. Jeremiah's prophecy is this worldly, it's historical, it's tied to a real military conquest when the Babylonians sacked Jerusalem. And here's what I think most people get wrong about Gehenna. When people hear Gehenna, which literally means the Valley of Hinnom, most will jump straight to child sacrifice. Scholars do it, commentaries do it, pastors do it. The assumption is that child sacrifice is what defined the valley. It's what gave Gehenna its dark reputation. And I get it. Child sacrifice is absolutely horrifying. But to be clear, it did happen. That's in the text. And I'm not trying to minimize that. But was it actually the defining issue? Or was it actually part of something larger? Look at the Deuteronomistic language in Jeremiah. The focus isn't child sacrifice. It's corpses being cast carelessly into the valley, thereby fulfilling the curse of Deuteronomy 28:26. So fixating on child sacrifice alone actually narrows the interpretive lens. And I think it actually distorts how we read Jeremiah 7 and 19, because it leads scholars to try to draw a straight line from child sacrifice to hell. However, if the starting point is wrong, everything after that is going to be way off. And so here's why that distinction is important. When Jeremiah renames the valley, he's not describing hell, he's describing what's about to happen to Jerusalem. The Babylonians are coming, and a lot of people are going to die. The valley, therefore, becomes a symbol, corpses piling up because Judah broke the covenant. This is a direct covenant curse written into Deuteronomy as the penalty for unfaithfulness. And Jeremiah is invoking it, not as a hypothetical, but as an imminent reality. And it's not just describing death either, it's describing a very shameful death. Denied burial, body left exposed, consumed by animals, publicly dishonored. What Deuteronomy threatens, Jeremiah announces as arriving. The curse now has an address, the Valley of Hinnom. Now, hold on to that Deuteronomy 28:26 connection, because it shows up again almost 300 years later in a very different text in First Enoch. The primary proof text that people often point to when they say that Gehenna became a place of postmortem punishment or hell in the Second Temple period is First Enoch 27, which says this: "Why is this land blessed and all filled with trees, but this valley is cursed?" Then Sariel answered one of the holy angels who was with me and said to me, "This cursed valley is for those who are cursed forever. Here will be gathered all the cursed who utter with their mouth an improper word against the Lord and speak hard things against his glory. Here they will be gathered, and here will be their habitation at the last times, in the days of righteous judgment, in the presence of all the righteous for all time. Here the godless will bless the Lord of glory, the King of eternity." So I'm not sure if this is the specific text that Dan is thinking of, but it most likely is at least one of them. But in this passage, Enoch is shown a cursed valley, and an angel tells him this is where those who are cursed will be gathered, where they'll dwell at the last times in the days of righteous judgment. So that sounds a lot like hell, right? That's the reading scholars have assumed for over a century. August Dillman in the 1800s, then R.H. Charles, then James Montgomery, who actually called this the earliest evidence linking Gehenna to hell. And that's basically the scholarly consensus today. And when we look at why the valley is cursed, the language is actually covenantal, not eschatological. Cursed in the Greek echoes the exact vocabulary of Deuteronomy, especially the curse formulas in chapter 27-28. Enoch's author is simply drawing on the Valley of Hinnom and that same cursed tradition from Jeremiah, but specifically connecting it to Deuteronomy 28:26. So what's First Enoch actually doing? I don't think the text is inventing hell, but rather it's applying the same covenant curse framework that Jeremiah already built into the symbol of the Valley of Hinnom. Arrogant speech against God, judgment, disgrace, and projecting that onto the last times. Now, notice also what's missing here. No mention of Gehenna or the valley. There's no resurrection language, no conscious afterlife, nothing about faith or even how one enters this hell. In fact, the last line of 1 Enoch 27 actually says, "The godless will bless God," which is a strange thing to say about souls in hell. So, Gehenna never left the Valley of Hinnom. Second Temple writers used it as a symbol of covenant unfaithfulness, not postmortem eschatological judgment. Even 1 Enoch 27, which draws on the Valley of Hinnom, while echoing the Deuteronomistic curse of chapter 28, never once mentions an afterlife. Now, there could be a couple other Second Temple period texts that people point out, like Judith 16:17. Maybe a few others in First Enoch as well, but First Enoch 27 really is the big one. Now, I want to be fair to Dan here, because this isn't the case where I think he's just wrong. The interpretation he's working from, that Gehenna becomes postmortem punishment in Greco-Roman Judaism, is the majority position. Dillman, Charles, Montgomery, and others today, it's the scholarly consensus, and there's a reason it became the consensus, because later Jewish and Christian texts absolutely develop Gehenna towards postmortem punishment in hell. Nobody's disputing that shift. It happens. Rabbinic literature moves there. Christian tradition obviously moves there. That trajectory is real. The question I'm raising isn't whether that happens, it's when, and how early people are reading it backwards into these specific texts. First, Enoch 27 gets cited as a proof text that this particular postmortem punishment reading is already in place during the Second Temple period. And I think that's where First Enoch and a few other texts are being asked to say more than what they really say. The absence of resurrection language, individual fate, or afterlife imagery in this text isn't nothing. It's the exact evidence you'd expect to find if this interpretive shift has not yet happened. So, again, this isn't Dan's wrong about Gehenna. It's more about the timeline needs a second look. During this time, the valley is still doing what Jeremiah built it to do: symbolize covenantal judgment, national disgrace, and this worldly consequence. The postmortem reading actually comes later,